Well, hello and welcome to our final session of Building Spaces of Solidarity and Connection, a historical, theoretical, and practical lens on libraries' commitment to inclusion, diversity, equity, and justice, hosted by the American Library Association Social Responsibilities Roundtable, or also known as SRRT or CERT. CERT believes that libraries and librarians must center social responsibility by recognizing and helping to solve social problems and inequities to work for the common good. My name is Kim Krutka, and I'll be moderating today's session, which is Issues in School Librarianship, Children's Literature, and Youth Services. Before I introduce the speakers, I'm going to go over some housekeeping. To enable captions, click More in the bottom right of the screen, and then click Show Captions. Our session today will be recorded, and the recording will be available on our website within a few weeks. If you can, please keep your mics off unless you are a presenter or posing a question during our question and answer portion at the end of the presentations. Please be respectful and extend care and compassion to yourself and others. We will have time for question and answer after all presentations have concluded, so please use the Q&A Zoom tool to pose questions for our presenters. That Q&A button, it may be hidden in your menu, but if you click on the More menu item, you should be able to find it there. And then you can pop your questions into the Q&A as the presentations are going. You don't need to wait until all the presentations are over to put them into the Q&A, but then I'll pose your questions to the presenters after all the presentations are completed. And then we'll reserve the chat to relay any tech issues, resource share outs, or appreciation for our amazing panelists. So I am especially excited about this session as a school librarian myself, and I'm so happy to introduce our four presenters. We will see first Jessica Ann Bratt, who is the author of Let's Talk About Race and Storytimes. Our second speaker will be Sandra Echols, a thought leader librarian, bibliotherapist, and educator with extensive experience managing public, academic, and school libraries. Then we will have Maggie Tokuda-Hall, author and a national leader of Authors Against Book Bans. And then lastly, we'll have Shannon Oltmann, an associate professor and program coordinator, the School of Information Science at the University of Kentucky. So without further ado, Jessica, you are up.
All right, thank you so much. And give me 1 second to share my slides and we'll be off. It's over. All right. All right, so who am I and why am I here? So I've been in the library world for over 12 years and 9 of those pre-COVID. And 3 of those in the after times, right? And so while I'm not in library land anymore, my roots run deep. Started as an entry-level librarian that was part of a school library partnership, and ended my career as a deputy director. I now work at an R&D AI learning startup, and so this presentation is a remix of old notes, new ideas, and yes, some AI-generated slides. So we're in the era of cyborg librarianship, so rolling with it. And before anyone is doomsdaying about AI, yes, I'm also in long-term safety research, especially around children. And I do think about the environmental cost, the ethics, and Terminator 3, but make it more academic. I'll drop a link at the end about some foundational challenges and some research that is being done in those foundational LLM challenges. So I am in the thick of the messy future, trying to make tech more equitable, and that includes how we teach kids to read and belong. So whether you're in public, school, or classroom library, whether you're able to do traditional story times or all you have time for is a read aloud and a book talk, we're going to talk about what actually has worked for me within my experience, what solidarity can look like in your story time practice, right? So just a little bit notes from the field. As I'm sure everyone knows, in this current climate, we understand why belonging matters. Knowing isn't the same as doing, and especially in places where support is very, very hard, right? The climate is worse right around everyone using different terms like DI as a scapegoat, right? So the pandemic to me wasn't just a disruption. It was a little bit of a reckoning within how are we going to be sustainable around belonging. And so I saw a lot of people try to show up in a radical reimagination of those systems, but a lot of people were grieving as well what they knew as the norm and sort of like this aftermath that we're in. So, how are we going to go forward affirming kids' identities when the rules of your space don't always allow it? And I think that's the question that is currently happening on many different levels. And so, belonging work is going to be situational. Sometimes you will be able to be loud, and sometimes you have to plant those quiet seeds. But the one thing that I want to make sure is that it's intentional. The way that people are going to be able to make it to wherever our next leap of progress is going to have clarity around what they're able to do and do well, and make sure that in their space they can do it. It is intentional. So, and talking about race, why I even created the book, it came out of seeing the need again and again for a structured, supported way for people to get started on their journey of prejudice um, reduction, right? So reducing prejudice one read aloud at a time. And so I felt people were at different parts in their journey. We would go to these really big trainings, and a lot of times people would come away more disheartened about what that meant for them wanting to do the work, or got kind of analysis paralysis because everything seemed so big and they didn't know how to take one incremental steps forward. So I felt like bringing in diverse books wasn't performative as much as it was like a deeper practice. So teaching physical differences, for example, like we see emojis with different skin tones, I felt is a science-backed way to cut through that ignorance, normalizing differences, giving parents and kids the tools to correctly address skin tone differences to help reduce shame, trauma. To me, that was like the liberation work I wanted to leave behind in my story times. So, I feel like joyful disruption is going to be the assignment, and it's going to be hard because as adults, we are working through a lot of uncertainty and a lot of chaos, and kids can pick up on the subtle signs of fear, right? And some of them know and are learning how to hide their stories, right? And so I feel that programming, especially, isn't going to be just about what should I read this week, but curating an experience where kids can learn emotional intelligence, radical self-love, and feeling that community care. So social emotional learning and tying that to identity development is going to be very, very important going forward. And so helping kids to name their feelings within this time, especially if they're going to ever write those future narratives, is going to be really, really important, right? Um, so I know you'll hear so many people, and a lot of the stuff that I'm going to bring is not new. You're going to hear it plenty before and after, maybe all throughout the day. So all I'm trying to impart is that I'm not asking anyone to stage a revolution in their library unless you truly want to. But there are small steps that you can do, and you can intentionally do to rethink your practice through the lens of curating joy and solidarity for the next couple years, because it's going to be very, very hard. And if you want more practical guidance, because I am, for the amount of time that I have, staying very high level, right? I have a course that you can do if you're truly wanting to make this practice a part of the work that you do. And I know that grant funding is drying up like my house plants in August. So it is okay if that is not in a lane that you can support, but it does have scenarios and role playing for doing more than just showcasing diverse books if you actually wanting to engage more in prejudice reduction work. So on that note, I am going to leave it there. And that's sort of hopefully my take on building solidarity through story times and figuring out how to best plant those seeds and the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And I feel I started writing down quotes that I loved, and then my list got too long. But especially like your plant quiet seeds sometimes, and sometimes be loud. And looking at books as a deeper practice. So thank you so much for starting us off with that. And now we will get to hear from Sandra.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I am Sandra Michelle Echols. I am a school librarian, but I've, like as my intro said, I've been public academic, which is a great, I'm still currently working in academia, which is a great opportunity to do this type of work. So I'm pulling from all of my vasting, but coming off the heels of Jessica, wasn't she fantastic? The work that she's doing is so monumental. Thank you, Jessica. So for me today, I don't have slides, but I would like to talk from my heart and talk about what it is that I feel where we have the persistent lack of authentic and diverse represented children's books. Having worked as a teen school media specialist right now and a teen librarian in the past, I've noticed that a lot of books do not look like the kids that we see, and a lot of books have come out where picture books are a lot better. So I did a project with my students here at Science Skills Center High School where it was called Picturing This, and we used picture books to talk about diversity because it allowed us to have more engaging conversations than reading full-length novels. And using the picture books for us meant that some kids were able to see themselves in the books, especially when you're talking about the LGBTQI community, where a lot of teens have questions. A lot of teens can't go home and ask those questions to their parents. The picture books really afforded us an opportunity to have the kids be in a safe space. And we do this every year. It has expanded, and the students are just overwhelmed with it. And even though we read the picture books, there's also some nonfiction, some fictional books that we read by authors. And one of the books that really stood out with my students here was recently we read 2 years ago, we had an opportunity to actually have Jazz Hammonds come to our school, visit our school, and do a full workshop with the students with her first novel, We Deserve Monuments. And most recently, we had a Zoom session with her about the book Thirsty. And because most of the kids remembered her from 2 years ago when it was when they're freshmen, a lot of them was freshmen and sophomores, and now they're graduating. Um, to hear from the book Thirsty, if you're not familiar with it, it's set on a college campus. It's college, and the themes of it in the book has the love relationships, but it also deals and touches on alcoholism. And that is something that gave my students an opening to ask questions about what it means to be on a college campus and be exposed to things that you haven't been exposed to in your daily life. So for me, diversity in children's literature is really all around us. And I feel that this is really a great time to be a librarian because we get to keep opening those windows. We get to teach students how, and Dr. Rudine says with the sliding glass doors, we get to have that opportunity to have those aha moments, but we also get to have the opportunity for our students to see themselves in the literature and be able to relate with it. Now, when we talk about the nature of censorship and book bans, the current wave and the current political climate that we're living in, I feel it disproportionately targets books featuring characters of color, and especially when they try to talk about the themes of race, racism, and cultural identity. And if we remove these stories from our schools and our public library shelves, this will actually harm students of color. Uh, I have the unique opportunity here to also co-teach courses by most very influential professors through this program called National Education Equity Lab. And one of the courses that I co-taught last term was called Social Problems, and it was a Morehouse course. And we got a chance to explore the social problems and for my students to understand that the censorship that's happening with book bans, and they deemed it as a social problem, and it shouldn't be that those books are being, placed in that type of context. But for me, these stories are important, and it's important for us to always keep these stories at the forefront for our students. And in that nature, um, I don't believe in book banning. I know that we have to be careful in this climate, especially in. I'm fortunate to live in a large city and work in a large city, so I know that my colleagues that live in other cities, there is an issue with that. Um, but there's always the idea you may not be able to have the book on your shelves, but there's always ideas to guide it through digital books. So like we have there's a lot of digital books that students can access. And if you put together on your reading list, if you can, then you afford students the opportunity to read in the privacy of them with the digital books. Um, and when we talk about funding, Jess said it, funding is drying up as quick as her houseplant. Hilarious. It is really drying up like that. I'm a grant writer and I see different things, but funding is drying up more so on the federal government side. And now it's more of you learning how to navigate and get those small funds, and the small fundings basically from community foundations and our individual donors is where we probably will need to now focus our research on. So that's called prospect research. And just that's my advice when it comes to that, to funding things now, is to do your prospect research and try to find out who's in your community that you might be able to say, hey, can we approach them for $500 because you want to run this program during Pride Month, and you know that you're not going to be able to fund it because it's something that can't be funded, and if you can run the program. I think that if we really want to talk about the systematic racism in this, it is big, and it's bigger than, it's big, and it's something that we would definitely need to expand upon on a different platform. And, what else I have to say about this? I thought this is a touching topic for me, and I should have prepared slides, but it's okay. When we talk about school librarians, there is not enough certified school librarians. And with the elimination of the funding that helped fund a lot of school librarians, I'm a IMLS scholar from St. John's University. I received my MLS that way. And if it wasn't for that, I probably would not have pursued my MLS because it was a second master's for me and to incur that debt. So there is that for me personally about that funding being lost. What else I have to say about this? The barriers. How am I doing on time? And also,
You're doing totally fine. You're good.
I'm doing fine.
Yes.
Okay. And so, out of all of this, out of all my experience that I've had, I started my own business, which is called Curated Collections by SME, and I've designed both personal and professional libraries, but it's with the bibliotherapist focus. I have done extensive research on the first African American bibliotherapist, and with her work and seeing her work, but she actually passed away, before she had an opportunity to publish a book. And Dr. Sadie Peterson Delaney, I do have a chapter coming out in June, I believe, in the ALA book. It's coming out. And with bibliotherapy, I'm able to take the social emotional learning piece and place those books in my students' hands. And I have a whole collection here at my school that's designed for that characters all go through social emotional learning. A book that my book club read this year was Chaos in Theory by Nick Stone. And what was so intriguing about this book is that it deals with mental health, but it also deals with alcoholism. It also deals with texting, how kids text. And sometimes when they're texting, the main character butt dialed someone, and it ended up being his friend because he had been in a car accident. I don't want to give too much away for it. But I really, really, and my students really, really enjoyed reading the book where it had text message format. So if you're not familiar with Chaos in Theory, I highly recommend that book as a great reading for book club, because it brings out a lot of themes. It brings out racism, it brings out privilege, and that's something that we're experiencing a lot more in America, where it's not about the color of your skin, it's more about the content of your pocket, right? It's becoming more of the haves and the have-nots, but it's across all borders. And so with that said, the act of privilege, the act of that financial privilege goes a long way. And that's something that the economic disparities are starting to show. I'm going to leave you with the fact that, going back to my beginning, that I feel that the diversity and the representation matters on your shelves. Representation matters on the shelves, but not only on the shelves of our libraries. If the books are there and the kids are not reading them, then it doesn't matter. Book talks, like I said, I use picture books with my students in a high school, believe it or not. And I use them not just for the English language learners, I use them for introducing tough themes and topics about racism, about sexual identity, and it actually opens up the conversation for us. So if you'd like to know more about how I use picture books in high schools, you could always email me. And I think that's what I have for now. Did I make my 12 minutes or?
No, you were good, Sandra. I mean, you have more time if you would like to talk more, but
If there's a question in the chat, I'll be happy to answer that question really quickly if it's built upon what I've been talking about.
well, I don't see one specific right now to you, but
Okay.
we did say we would do that at the end, so they might be
Okay.
holding on to it, ready
All
to do it towards the end. But I appreciate what you talked about, especially the power of picture books and YA books, and even practical ways. You address this in practical ways to incorporate those within your libraries. So thank you so much. And I always love a good Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop reference. So appreciate you talking about her as well. So thank you, Sandra, so much. And we'll get to the question and answer after our final presentation.
Okay.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to Maggie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm going to share my screen so that you guys can see my little presentation here. I wanted to focus a little bit on a specific book that I've written. So I'm Maggie Tokuda-Hall, and the author of Love in the Library. It is the true story of how my maternal grandparents met in a Japanese American incarceration camp during World War II. My grandmother Tama really was the camp librarian. My grandfather George really did go in every day and check out far too many books that he had no intention of reading so that he could come flirt with her. They got married and they had their first child in Minidoka. And when I was growing up, why is it not letting me advance slides anymore? Oh, there we go. I was awesome, as you can tell from this picture. But also, it was the only story about state-sanctioned violence that I knew about. This was long before the kind of push for diverse books in literature. It was before a real push to tell kids the truth about American history. And so I always wondered, what was wrong with us? I absorbed so much shame because I knew that this had happened to our family, and I knew that I got bullied at school for eating seaweed and for having mochi, and I erroneously thought that there must be something wrong with Japanese American people, because when we shelter children from the shared history of state-sanctioned violence in the United States, but not the effects of it, we double their pain. We let them suffer, and we let them suffer alone. And they believe, like I did, that there must be something wrong with them. It wasn't until I got much older that I realized that I wasn't alone, and that our family wasn't alone, and that in fact we were part of this much larger group of people in the United States who have been targeted by state-sanctioned violence. Obviously, in the top left corner, we see pictures of the Jim Crow era that we talk about a lot in schools. But what we may not talk about are things that happened in the last 10 years that are still evidence of this same culture. I see here the tear gassing of indigenous protesters who were just trying to protect their land from having an oil pipeline built directly underneath it, which would have destroyed their access to clean water, not to mention their community. There are pictures from Donald Trump's first administration with the family separation policy. These are people being punished for the dream of wanting to be American. And in the bottom right, we see a nonviolent Black Lives Matter protester bracing themselves for the violence that is coming for him despite his posture. And it wasn't also until later that I was a part of this like incredible tradition of powerful people from these groups who fought back and fought for better. And in fact, most of these people were people I learned about as an adult, not as a child at all. like Yuri Kochiyama, who worked with the Black Panthers. She was kept in Japanese American incarceration camps from 1942 to 1945, just like the people in my family. But ultimately, she became an activist for kind of cross-racial group solidarity, which is so meaningful to me now. And Marsha P. Johnson, who famously threw the first brick at Stonewall. And of course, I live in California, I live in Oakland, and Oakland's own Angela Davis is somebody that I still feel immense pride over. Because when you learn more and more about American history, it's not just about the racist policies that have targeted people like me and like the other speakers who are here today, but it's also about the people with incredible strength to fight back against odds that seem absolutely insurmountable, as each one of these women did. Nowadays, though, and thanks to Project 2025, we have seen a real push in the opposite direction. I don't think that it is any kind of surprise that Donald Trump came up as a backlash to our first Black president. And he represents in so many ways the politics of white grievance. And their policies around book bans specifically demonstrate this. And I want to call your attention to a particular passage. I think as teachers, you are all probably very aware of what Project 2025 outlined for public education at large with the dissolution of the Department of Education. But as it pertains to book bans specifically, they seek to undo the burden of the Miller test and redefine what pornography means. And to them, pornography is basically anything that includes representations of LGBTQ people at all. And not only do they think that that shouldn't be allowed, that pornography is should be treated like any illicit drug, they also think that the people who create it, and that's people like me, should be imprisoned and put on a sex offenders list. And they think that people who distribute it, which are the teachers and librarians, should also be arrested and put on sex offender lists. Right now, the news that's coming out constantly that just feels like the fire hose of the worst possible news you could ever imagine is much less surprising if you look through Project 2025. He is enacting that agenda, and they made it very, very clear. And so I recommend doing what book banners do not, and to read the book, as upsetting and boring as it is. I think you probably are all also deeply aware that the problem of book bans has been exponentially rising every year since 2020. And to me, it is no surprise that that happened in reaction to the George Floyd protests. I think there were people in power who realized that children were creating cross-racial group coalitions to fight against injustice. And they realized that the best way to stop those kinds of movements from happening would be to restrict the kind of literature that they had access to, with the added bonus that book bans cost a huge amount of money. Scratch a book banner and you usually find somebody who's a proponent of school vouchers as well. The goals are to both silence people from groups like mine, LGBTQ plus people, people of color, but it is also to defund our institutions of public learning because of the massive amount of sway and expense that these cost institutions. I don't know if you can see it on your screen, but this map is provided by PEN America, and this is a map of school book bans in the 2023-2024 school year. And your eye might be drawn to Florida, which is the absolute worst. And in fact, they're trying to legislate more bills that would make it even easier for them to ban books, despite the fact that 95% of public school parents in Florida want their children to have full access to the library. You see Iowa on there as well. They're kind of in an arms race with South Carolina and Florida to see who can pass the most terrible legislation the fastest. But I want to bring your attention to Texas, which is still a very bright red, and that is upsetting and that is not good. But last year, their map showed a deep, deep, almost black red. And the reason that it has lightened up so much is because normal people, educators, parents, teens, activists of all stripes have gotten involved in their fight, and their grassroots has become incredibly organized. And I am so moved that even under deeply inhospitable circumstances, because Greg Abbott is enacting what can only be called a Christo-fascist agenda, they have still had incredible success. I'm sure as teachers, all of you have seen this logo before. And before I say everything that I'm about to say, I want to be 100% clear that I believe that Scholastic publishes some of our most important children's literature, and that there are people in the publishing division of Scholastic that are doing essential, fabulous work who do not deserve to have their reputations dragged through the mud. But the story that I'm going to tell you is about their Education Solutions division, which is the division that sells directly to people like you. If you've heard of me before, it might be because about 2 years ago, I got in a public kerfuffle with Scholastic. They offered me a licensing opportunity, which is where they go through other publishing houses' catalogs and they see books that they want to sell directly to schools. And they chose Love in the Library, which to me was a dream opportunity. I wrote Love in the Library so that it would be used in classrooms. But when I read their offer, my blood ran cold because I realized they were asking for something I couldn't give them. At the end of Love in the Library, there is an author's note. And in it, I say basically exactly what I just said now, that what happened to my grandparents wasn't an isolated moment in American history. And in fact, it's a part of a tradition of racist policies. And they made me delete that entire paragraph, or they wanted to ask me to delete that entire paragraph. But not only that, they wanted me to remove the word racism from the author's note altogether. I don't think you need to be a scholar in Japanese American incarceration during World War II to know that it is impossible to talk about what happened to my grandparents without using the word racism. And I asked if my deal would be contingent upon me removing this language, and they said yes. So I said no, and I said no publicly. And for the next almost 2 years, I've had meetings with their leadership to try to improve how they are handling these kinds of requests internally. But I will tell you what I told them, which is that while I think that they have come in with really good faith efforts to improve what they are doing, I believe that the same thing would have happened. It just would have happened more politely. And in fact, just a few months after what I went through with Scholastic, they got busted trying to offer segregated book fairs to schools that hosted their book fairs with all of the diverse titles removed from it. My dearest hope from my situation was that what had happened to me would never happen again, but instead the lesson that they seemed to have learned was not to leave receipts, because the sales representatives who offered these did not email the offer, even though they email almost all of their correspondence with their clients. They called and offered them to ensure that there would be no paper trail. And so if we're hoping that we can capitalism our way out of this fight, I just want to assure you that we cannot and we will not. As a result of all of this, I was invited to speak at a lot of different places, and one of them was the Idaho Library Association. And I gave a speech that I was proud of, but at the end of it, I saw people weeping, and I realized that there must be something else going on. It wasn't just what I had said. And so I started talking to those librarians, and in those stories, I was horrified and radicalized by what they are going through, by the harassment that they receive for keeping diverse books on the shelves, for the death threats that have been levied their way, by the accusations that they are pedophiles and groomers and child molesters for offering books like Everyone Poops. It was truly horrific. And that time particularly inspired me to get involved in a more significant way. And so along with 6 of my colleagues, we launched a group called Authors Against Book Bans. We are now more than 5,000 members strong all across the country, and we organize the creator army to be deployed wherever we are needed. We have already blocked a lot of terrible legislation just this year. And we have been organizing press conferences with people like Judy Bloom and Jason Reynolds to speak against legislation that seeks to undo the burden of the Miller test in Florida, because we see these things happening all over the place. It's worth mentioning that while I talked about Love in the Library because it speaks specifically about censorship within the classroom, it's not my most banned book. My most banned books are The Mermaid, the Witch in the Sea, and Squad, which are both young adult books, and they are both banned for being queer. There's no other way to say it. The fact that Squad is about a bunch of teenage girls who turn into werewolves at the full moon and kill the worst boy they can at a party is not the reason it gets banned, even though I think there's a really reasonable conversation I'm willing to have with anyone who about whether or not representing flippant violence is ever appropriate for teenagers or for children of any age. But that's not why it gets banned. It gets banned because two of the girls fall in love and kiss. And frankly, that's the only age-appropriate, healthy thing that they do for the entire book. I don't mean to be alarmist, but the fight that we're up against is an existential one. And unfortunately, we are at the stage where everybody has to participate. The only thing that undoes authoritarian power is collective action. And we know what the alternative is. We know that attacking books is a means for attacking individuals. It is a framework for physical violence, because when we take away somebody's voice, we take away their humanity. And once their humanity is gone, it is much easier to do violence upon them. The thing that I want everybody to always take away from any talk that I give on this subject comes back to my grandparents. Tama was just a librarian and George was just a pharmacist. They were regular people, but they still managed to do something in the face of unimaginable injustice. They were able to fall in love in a place that was built to deny them their humanity. And if they could do that, I want each of us to ask ourselves, what can we do? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maggie. How powerful. And thank you for continuing this conversation today on this panel about the significance of representation or lack of representation and directly connected to social justice, injustice. So thank you so much, Maggie. Now we will move on to Shannon.
I'm going to share my slides. All right. Give me 1 second to adjust my display. All right, can you guys see my slides? Yeah. Sorry, give me a second. I always have trouble with this. All right. You see my my presentation?
I do not yet.
Okay. Let's try this. Okay. Very good. So I'm a professor at the University of Kentucky, and I study things like book bans and censorship, as well as teach about them. As you can imagine, I've been unfortunately very busy the past few years.
And Shannon, I hate to interrupt. I'm sorry. Right now, I can just see what looks like the wallpaper of your, which is lovely.
Thank you for interrupting.
Sure, yeah. I know technology is not always our best friend. Okay,
Yes.
I can see it.
Okay, so let so as we've heard from other presenters and as we've talked about this afternoon, book censorship has rapidly escalated since 2020. These numbers come from the American Library Association, and they are reports that libraries make to the ALA. We can see, for example, in 2022 to 2023, the number of books challenged or banned increased 65% in 1 year. It's important to note these are only a fraction of the challenges. Many challenges and bans do not get reported to the American Library Association, and so they do not show up in these figures. I also want to note, as other presenters have said, that these occur in all 50 states, politically conservative and liberal states, rural, urban, and suburban areas. This is a nationwide crisis right now. So in other words, it's an enormous problem, especially in public and school libraries. I don't believe it's going away anytime soon. In addition to challenges to books, we also see challenges to Things like library programming and events, different types of resources, audio-visual content, displays that libraries put on, even databases like EBSCO have been challenged. And unfortunately, some librarians have lost their jobs and some libraries have closed, so far just temporarily. I think I'm speaking to a room of fellow believers, but just to refresh our stance, the role of libraries is to provide access to almost all information. And the common librarian stance is that a broad range of information should be available to all people in a community, including viewpoints that are not always popular or widespread. It's really important to represent everyone in the community. In contrast, of course, book bans try to restrict access to information. They're really antithetical to the purpose of libraries. And as we see, they often target children and teen books in both public libraries and school libraries. These are some of the books that have been frequently challenged in the past few years. So people might ask, why are library resources being challenged? What is going on here? And often we hear this phrase, difficult content. These books have difficult content. I find it difficult to talk about with my kids, so I want it removed. Difficult content is really vague, right? But it boils down to 3 types of content, most often. And we're talking about LGBTQIA content or authors. We're talking about what I've kind of grouped together as DEI content. This is resources and books that have protagonists of color, authors of color, books that talk about structural racism. These are often challenged. And then the third category of often challenged books is sexually explicit. This is books that include sex scenes, even sex education books. So here's the books most frequently challenged in 2023. And I know you probably can't read the fine print. That's okay, because I will, spoiler alert, tell you that all of them were challenged for one of the 3 reasons on the previous slide. These are the common reasons that books are challenged across all types of libraries. But I think there's something deeper going on here, and other speakers have mentioned this as well. Really what we're seeing are right-wing movements to restrict access to materials that challenge a traditional worldview. I think this is a response in part to the increasing social acceptance and frank conversations around things like racism and sexuality, as well as the changing demographics that we see. I think for some folks, they have a fear of how our society is changing and might continue to change, and the potential implications of those changes. There's also a broad push to defund the public service sector. We can see this in things like the charter school movement, restricting funding for parks, for municipal pools, and for other public services and public goods. Public and school libraries are part of that movement. I think there's a desire from some people for a homogenous society and for minority groups, marginalized communities to be invisible, to not be present in the library, to not be present in the library collections. I love this graphic across the bottom of this slide that libraries are for everyone. I think a lot of libraries believe that and try to enact that. However, other people disagree with that. They don't want libraries to be for everyone. They want to return to the good old days, right? They want to return to that time when minorities were more invisible, were less visible, and we didn't have frank conversations about things like racism, sexism, and the queer community. But of course, the good old days were not good for many people. The good old days were only good for a very, very small slice of society. For most of us, The only good thing about the good old days is that they're gone, as activist and comedian Dick Gregory said. So why do diverse resources matter? If we're getting this tsunami of censorship, the tsunami of book challenges, with all these underlying motivations and complications, why push back? Why keep ordering books and that could be challenged? Why keep putting them on your shelves and talking about them to kids? As several presenters have said, it's about representation, right? It's about seeing ourselves and seeing other people. As Dr. Bishop said, it's about having mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors in the literature around us. Another way to think about representation, I love this quote from this rabbi. We need diverse representation, not only so every kid can see themselves as the hero of the story, but so that every kid can understand that other types of kids are also the heroes. I think that's a really profound way to look at the importance of diversity for all communities. I want to circle back to this idea of difficult content. The idea of being difficult. It's often an accusation of the majority against historically oppressed and marginalized communities. And it's raised when people start to seek justice, equity, and inclusion. Oh, they're being difficult. Oh, that's a difficult person, right? It's often born of discomfort, fear, and guilt. And it's usually unanswerable. What I mean by that is there's no way to defend yourself against a claim of being a difficult person. Therefore, we shouldn't try. We can bypass the whole conversation about being a difficult person, about difficult content. It's a false claim. It's a red herring. Instead, what we need to do is focus on our own little corners of the world. This pin is placed approximately where I live in Louisville, Kentucky. And that's what I mean, focus on our small little corners. In your neck of the woods, find some small ways to contribute to doing good in your community. You can support different advocacy groups. You can volunteer, donate. Sometimes just encouraging the people around you is a way to do good. The other thing we have to do is remember the power of libraries. School libraries and public libraries, all types of libraries, are incredibly powerful. They have the power to change communities, to change an individual's life, right? So in conclusion, I want to just reemphasize that I think diverse resources in libraries are essential for our contemporary society. And the other presenters this afternoon have done a great job of explaining that, articulating that. Small groups oppose this, and it is true that book banners are in a minority, but they're very vocal. So we need to step up and support our libraries in a more vocal and persistent way. And I will end there so we have plenty of time for questions and conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shannon. And we do have a question in the Q&A, and then I'm gonna encourage those who are here to go ahead and continue to add some there. I am, because of where you just ended, going to pose a question that connects to something you just said, and that if any other panelists would like to contribute, or if Shannon, if you had more to say about it, but in thinking about this, kind of some key elements that drive maybe book restriction and book bans, and like this fear of this acceptance or inclusion of certain people, or certain ideas or certain experiences. And you pointed out, it's hard to argue against this idea of being difficult, but instead to focus on your corner of the world, remember the power of libraries. If you want to say any more about that, like how you can kind of counter, or if Sandra, Maggie, or Jessica had anything to add on that too, I would love to hear that for myself and also for anyone else here who might find themselves in that position.
So I think one of the most important things we can do is have conversations. and talk about the power and the joy of libraries, whether it be at Little League with the parent sitting next to you, at your faith organization, in line at the grocery store. These little conversations add up. And if we can convey that libraries are useful and good parts of our society, if we can convey that having diverse resources matters. I think there's a lot of people who don't know this battle is going on or don't feel invested in this battle. And so having those little conversations over and over again, I think is one important thing we can do, but I'd love to hear what other folks have to say.
One of the arguments that I give a lot, because the school presentation that I give for Love in the Library is actually very similar to what I said to you all today. I talk to kids and to adults very similarly. I use a slightly different vocabulary, but the broad strokes of what I have to say is the same. I actually give kids more historical background because I have more time with them than I did today. But when we don't tell kids the truth, we basically just delay them understanding it. We're cheating them of a better, more resilient, wiser, bigger version of themselves. And being confronted with things that are hard is how we grow. And I think a lot of parents understand that with things like sports. You know, you have to keep practicing, you have to keep trying, even though it's hard, even though right now it seems like you'll never catch a ball, even though it seems like you'll never kick a goal. You keep doing it, even though it's hard, because good things are worth working for, and an understanding of the world is worth working for. And additionally, like, I think, you know, with marginalized children, like children who come from, you know, backgrounds where maybe they're a person of color, or maybe they're LGBTQ, you know, we tell these stories because they require it for their survival. This is an essential part of them feeling guarded and ready for the world, because again, I felt alone and I wasn't. I didn't need to feel that shame. It was fake. It was not earned. I didn't, you know, there was nothing wrong with my community. Actually, we're a part of this much larger group. But for kids who are not part of this community, they are also being cheated of all of this cross-group solidarity and all of this understanding of the world that would make them feel more empowered. We hear a lot about white guilt, as though kids will hear this and feel like I did something wrong. No, they didn't. They didn't do anything wrong. They have the power to do something much better in the future. And that's what we're giving them, is the tools to be better than the people who came before them. And I can't think of something more empowering and beautiful than that.
I would say that, so for me, my grandfather was born in 1898. My mom was the youngest of 22. So saying that history is a super long time ago is not a reality for my history. And the deep south of Mississippi, watching people do the Great Migration for better opportunities, got me really curious about sense making. And so I have a long line of tolerance for being curious about how people make sense of the world. It is not for everyone. So I usually try to figure out, how do people get to the point whether they are willfully ignorant or willfully inept. So I just try to go through, where are they getting their information, right? How are they processing the world? What does that look like? And then if there is a war on information and sense making, then we're all going to feel like we're in Civics 100 of like, how is a country founded? What does it feel like to be isolated? So I feel, for me, I get really curious to figure out how people are making sense of the world, and then figure out what's my lane to disrupt that. And knowing that the kids, like, for example, Maggie showing with Texas, the kids had underground libraries. Like, they figured out how to make sense of the world. And I feel like the power with kids is, like, a lot of times they don't need permission if they're gonna figure out what they need to figure out. So I feel like part of my journey is helping adults rediscover how making sense of the world impacts all of their choices, and how to disrupt them actively choosing against not only their own self-interest, but impacting everyone else regarding that. So that is, I'm a professor level response of, I feel like the kids are all right, and I'm out here trying to be like, the adults have to get it together.
And I just want to note, we talked about Iowa leading or fighting for the lead in terrible legislation, right? Two bills that were really anti-library died in committee today in Iowa because people contacted their legislators and said, hey, the library matters. And so those bills died a quiet death, thankfully.
There have been more success stories like that too. In Wyoming, there was a bill that would have criminalized booksellers for selling anything with nudity in it, which would have been impossible. Like, what do you mean, like naked butts, like in No David by David Shannon, the picture book? It was an insane bill, and that died quietly in committee. There was also one in Oklahoma that would have criminalized, done exactly what Project 2025 promised to do, which was to criminalize everybody who writes sexual content and to make them sex offenders. And that died quietly in committee. And I think that we find that even in the deepest of red places, even cursory pushback to some of this is effective because these bills are bananas, and they fly in the face of most common sense. And so it really, I don't know what else to say to embolden all of us to feel like this is the appropriate time to be the thorn in your represented officials' sides, but now is the time.
Agreed, Maggie. Thank you for that. And Sandra, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything else on there. No pressure, but I wanted to make sure to open it up to you.
I'm sorry, I have students here. If you
Yeah.
can repeat the question, I was navigating two things at the same time.
No, I completely understand. Well, and I was looking at, I forgot where I started with this question, actually. When did I start with this? And talking about, the arguments that are made sometimes for like at the core of what restriction to access and for book bans, and then how it's sometimes motivated by this fear of like this acceptance or inclusion, and how to sometimes it feels like a conversation like that in response to that is difficult to do, or that it's like a no-win situation. So if there are strategies or things to do in order to continue to push back or to have a conversation or whatever it is.
So I believe in authenticity and just having that authentic conversation. I too, like Jess, have family roots to the rural South, Georgia. And just this morning, I had a conversation with one of my students. I teach 2 college courses here at Science Skills Center High School. The second one is the education of Black girls. And it's a course from Spelman College. And it was like, they were asking me questions like, so how did your mom, because I shared with them that my mother had a 3rd grade education and that my grandmother had no education. She just learned to speak, just by holding conversations. And for some immigrant students, it's like, to them, it's like, whoa, you didn't speak a different language? Your grandmother was born in the United States and she had a problem with communicating. And so I explained to them that that's one of the things, the disparities of the rural South, and that education was always seen and has been and still will be the pipeline for success for people of color or just minorities in general. And I just usually write the word learn on the board for my students. And I tell them, look at this word learn. Drop the letter L off. What are we left with? We left with the word earn. You drop the letter N off of earn, we left with the word ear. What do we use our ears to do? We listen. When we listen, we learn. And when we learn, we do not put a cap on our earning potential. And so it's just in that realm and that element of understanding that yes, there are policies and procedures in place that may try to prohibit you from learning, but once you learn how to read, you can learn. And then that's just what I tell the students. You take that from that standpoint of looking at the glass being half full and not half empty, and having a growth mindset and being able to move through spaces. And as I said earlier, we're having an equity issue. It's not about race. It's not about sexual orientation. It's about economics now. I mean, we live in a knowledge-based society. We no longer, America has turned into consumers, but now the new consumer is knowledge. And as Jess pointed out with AI, I'm an AI enthusiast, and I teach my students that you must learn how to use this tool. It is a tool. Just as when people learn how to use the calculator, it was a tool. Now, people may beg to differ with me about, oh, well, it can promote, cheating and things of that nature, but it all goes into still looking back at what systems are in place for banning, what systems are in place to just keep people marginalized. And I just believe in that when you keep people marginalized, it is your duty once you learn how to read, because reading for people in my family, some people died for it. When my family was in slavery, some people died for learning how to read. And so for me, I just look at learning as the potential of anything that you need to earn, whether it's financial gain or whether it's emotional gain, whether it's whatever gain you need, learning is the key and essential. So for me, that's where my personal standpoint from as a person, but as an educator, I totally believe in diversity and I believe in students being able to access all information. And that's my statement.
Thank you, Sandra. I appreciate that. Okay, we're going to move on to a question that was put in the Q&A. And I think it specifically might be to Jessica, but I'm going to put it into the chat so you can read it too. I like to see the questions if I'm asking a question. So I'm going to put it in there. Do you have a quick list of books, practices, or a sample lesson outside of the training course? Something we might be able to demo in our story time to see if this might work for us. And since it's practice kind of oriented, I'm also going to open up to all panelists once Jessica has a chance to respond. If there's any like practical like tips, tricks, and I know some of you have mentioned some, but anything else you might like to add in here for any practitioners who are here on the call.
Sure. So I would say the book that I published, Let's Talk About Race, has free templates in the back that put a story time together for you. If you want to see me do it live in a demo, Nicole Cook did in the middle of COVID, she did a virtual story time and we all participated. I think it's her Augusta Baker series. So you can go do some intelligence gathering and figure out if she still has those YouTube videos up. I would say for elementary school, what I really like is Black is a Rainbow Color. Because a lot of times you let the book do the heavy lifting for you. And so that book was posed out of the premise of children trying to understand Black as a color versus a culture, and someone wanting to do the etymology of how that identity has progressed, and the whole conversation of groups naming themselves versus being labeled, right? So there's a lot that you can do at each stage of whether it's kindergartners, or if you can get into those second to third grade, more robust discussion. So that one, for like first graders, even it is like a baby book, but like whose needs are these? You can start with that of like pointing out physical differences that everyone's created with different skin tones. Isn't it amazing? You tie it with the affirmations, which are really important. Isn't it amazing that we're all created differently? And you start giving them the tools around melanin or baking in like science. It is not any of the ignorance or the shutting down of conversations that kids in kindergarten are going to ask anyway. So those are like two examples. But there's stuff out there, and I feel like if you need more, I'm sure you can find lists out there as well.
One thing I'll jump on and add is this question always makes me think of a rural library director that we interviewed about drag story time several years ago. And she said, yeah, I've done a drag story time in my rural area and it was a big success. And we're like, oh, tell us more about that, because that's not the narrative you hear all the time. And she said, well, I've been here 5 years and I didn't do a drag story time my first month. I built incrementally up to it. So first I did a scan to see how diverse the collection was. I bought a few books. The next year we put some books on display. The next, and incrementally increasing the diversity in the collection and the diversity that the community saw and participated in. And as the community became more familiar and comfortable with the queer resources and the queer programming, she was able to push the envelope a little bit more and a little bit more. So yeah, as Jessica said in the chat, scaffolding is very important. And I think sometimes sometimes incremental change is important too. Sometimes we get impatient with that, and I totally understand that. But sometimes it's the bit by bit by bit that we do that adds up to a lot.
I have some book recommendations because I always have book recommendations. For picture books, I recommend Bodies Are Cool by Tyler Fetter. It's just about body diversity, and I think it's a really beautiful book, and I wish it had existed when I was a kid. I think it would have been really helpful for me. The Bridges Yuri Built by Kai Naima Williams, who's actually Yuri Kochiyama's granddaughter, is a really great book. And Seen and Unseen by Betsy Partridge is probably the best children's book explaining how representations of the Japanese American incarceration determined kind of like how we tell that story, and how 3 different photographers from Ansel Adams, who posed Japanese Americans to make them look like they were having the best time in prison, to an actual incarcerated photographer who took the pictures of all the doldrums and the extreme boredom and the difficulty. It's really a beautiful book. It's highly illustrated. I think it's appropriate for like 4th grade and up. What Are Your Words by Catherine Locke is a good one, just about pronouns and finding the ones that feel right to you, and feeling comfortable with the fact that when you're a kid, those things shift, and maybe today it's this and another day it's a different thing, and that's healthy and good. And then for bigger books, I think there are 2 adaptations for younger readers that are really important. One is Stamped from the Beginning by Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kendi. I don't think anyone's shocked to hear that. And also How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith has just been adapted for younger readers. And I think that that's going to be an extremely essential book that's going to get banned everywhere.
Thank you, Maggie. I laugh, but also cry. So thank you, Sandra. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but so yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm fine. For me, it's being in this. I wish I could, my background is blurred, but this is my 4th school year here at Science Skill Center High School, and I actually had the opportunity to build this library from scratch. When I arrived, we only had 2,000 books, and now we have 13,851 books, courtesy of grants that I've written, and was able to diversify my collection. I am actually going to get up and walk for a second and not unblur my background, because I'm a picture book fanatic. And let's see if I can, yeah. This is my lovely picture book collection. And it has, I think it has about 500 picture books in there. And I did that because I wanted my students to understand the power of picture books. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a picture book fanatic, and one of my favorite picture books came out when I was a public librarian, and that is Entangle Makes 3. And that happened to be because it was a story using animals and the penguins. It was just like a very important thing for that time, in that era, for me during that time. And I have a great list. It's just not here in front of me, and that's the one that we'll be able to post it. I'll be able to post my picture book list that I have. It's very diversified. I have books from, I have I'm a fan of illustrators. So like all the books about African American history that Kedar Nelson actually illustrated, I have every one of his books here in my school library, which is like, it's my pet thing, but it's that those books are very important. For me, the stories that get untold are the books that go out of print. If you're familiar with the book publishing industry, you will know that books of people by people of color get one run, and books of people that are not people of color get another run. So in other words, a person of color book might get 5,000 runs, the first print out, and the person who's not of color, their book might get 25,000 copies out. And so that's a big thing in the publishing industry. And I try to make sure that I keep all those books here, that high school students can be aware of the lessons and the things that they miss out on. And for me, it is telling the history, it's telling those untold stories. It's finding those books that relate to everything, that the questions that they don't ask. Because today's generation, I really feel empowered to be here, because these students don't understand yesterday. They don't understand what happened yesterday actually is what we're living today. And that the laws that goes into place, things that happen, they don't pay attention to, but 10, 15 years from now, they will be privy to it and maybe living through it. And the case that I give is the Higher Education Act that was reappropriated by Bill Clinton, former President Bill Clinton, in which it made it that parents are legally responsible for children's higher education until the age of 24. When I went to college for the first time around in 1988, I signed for my own student FAFSA. I signed my own FAFSA. But unfortunately, today, until the age of 24, but you can vote at 18. You can drive at 21. You can get a gun in some states at 18, legally purchase a gun, but you can't legally obtain your higher education without your parents until the age of 24. And so that was a lesson that I taught my students, that, you know, we just looked at the Higher Education Act, and they didn't actually know this. And this is why things are happening the way they're happening. So that's my soapbox. I'll go on with that, but I am just a fan of picture books.
Thank you, Sandra. And I love seeing your picture book collection. I'm also a huge picture book fanatic, so I appreciate it. And I'm in a high school, and we also have a picture book section that we use all the time. So I appreciate, and seeing your library. That's great. Thank you so much, Sandra. Okay, so I'm going to put a question into, and thank you for everyone contributing to that question. I'm putting another question into the chat that was shared in the Q&A from a participant here. It says, I find that a lot of the difficult content that these people are citing is sexual in nature. While there are themes of diversity, etc., they will use a single scene of sexual content to ban a book. How do you argue with that, knowing that the broader themes are so important, but they shame us for advocating for a book with sexual content? No pressure.
This may be, I hope this is the platform that I can say this, but I generally, off the record, if someone comes to me with this very question, you know, if it's not in the school setting or if it's like it's a social context, I literally will say the Holy Bible has sex in it. And that usually gets people to thinking. I mean, the Holy Bible has sex, and the Holy Bible talks about sex. It talks about men and women coming together, you know, it talks about it. And when you say that, it stumps people to know that, you know, when they want to hold up behind the banner of religion, and you know, I'm a person that feels that I have a relationship. It's not about the religion, it's about the relationship. But people like to use the religion over the relationship, and that's why they can't see that. And if in the school content, I will find things in the book that will not just talk about the sexual content of the book, but talk about the other elements of the book and where this can be used as a teaching tool, opposed to just that one book with the kiss, or the one book of the girls holding hands, or the one book of the boy stroking the other young man's shoulder. I would find something in that book like Thirsty. We're reading Thirsty. Thirsty has alcoholism. Alcoholism has been something since the age of Prohibition. That's what I would fight for if Thirsty ended up on the banned book. I'm like, okay, well, alcohol was never deemed a drug. Alcohol is, you know, something that's used, and alcoholism is a disease. So let's concentrate on this disease that's being highlighted in this book and not concentrate on the fact that it's two girls who happen to fall in love in college.
I often make the argument that books are a really safe way for kids to engage with more adult things than they may be ready for in their real life in a way that is risk-free. I would way rather them read about sex than have unprotected whatever sex, because they didn't know that there were other ways to think about it. And so, it's sex education has been a lightning rod for a very long time, but studies bear out in places where sex education exists, kids make more responsible decisions about sex, and there are less instances of teen pregnancy and STI transmission. So there's, from that angle of like, hey, we do this because this is actually a safer way for kids to engage with something that they're going to be curious and excited by, and, going to experiment with, whether we want them to or not. Kids are gonna have puberty whether we want them to or not, and they're gonna potentially have sexual feelings whether we're comfortable with that or not. And as a parent, I totally understand why that makes you uncomfortable. I don't like thinking about my children becoming sexual beings either, but they still will, because that's a part of growing up, and we have to love them for who they are as a whole, not just the parts of them that make us feel the most comfortable.
I always felt when I got questions, it was like, if the book was tied to a movie, have they already seen the movie? Then you'll be fine. I'm also like, do you know their browser history? And or like now it's TikTok, right? Like,
Yeah.
have you actively seen, because if we're real talk, I have more concerns about, can we have a conversation around what type of porn they're consuming and unrealistic expectations within a fantasy world? Because like we help create AI characters, right? Of like dream dating games, right? It's like, so my list was always like, don't come with me because I will read you nicely for filth, but also try to make you think about all of the other ways you can be engaged with your kid as a whole person versus like 2D information and imagination. Like I also feel like people discount how hard you have to work at figuring out, sometimes depending on how great the author is, of putting scenes together. And you know, all that to say is I would have a running list to get the parent to like, let's really talk about a lot of times how you were raised as a child and your fears, and then working through that to allow their kid to take out the book that they wouldn't want them to read.
A thing you
Well,
can suggest. Oh, sorry, Shannon, go ahead.
Please.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think just to piggyback off of that, I think you can suggest to parents when they're concerned about pornography is that we suggest that they install Google Safe Search on their children's devices if that's the thing that they're most afraid of, because there's a wealth of pornography that is much easier to get a hold of than in a book. If they're going to read a whole book to get to one scene with a blowjob in it, I feel like they earned it. I don't know that that's the argument I'd make, but like that took a lot of effort on their part. That's a lot easier than a Google search.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, this is where the simple reference interview comes in, right? Okay, this book made you unhappy. Let's find you a different book. You don't like that there's a blowjob in this book. Let's find a book that will work for your teen. I think there are, redirect does not always work, but I think it's surprising how often it works.
I think too, sometimes when parents are talking about the sex stuff that makes them uncomfortable, what they're really talking about is their own shame. And you're not going to be able to fix that for them, and that's not your job.
I agree.
Librarians are
Piggybacking
doing
off of-
enough, right?
Yep, piggyback off of Maggie with that one. I grew up in the 80s, the late 80s and 1990s, and that was pre-cell phones. And so my thing when I get those grandparents or those older parents, I say to them, imagine if they had cell phones out and Instagram out when you were 17. And then they're like, you can see them quailing on the inside, like, because they know what they did at that age. And then, at least now kids have books where they can, travel in that book and read something if they had an idea to experiment. During those days, you didn't have much, but you had Agatha Christie with her murder stories, but then you also had all those romance novels, and they were quite racy back then, the romance novels. So they were
Yeah.
bad and they were racy and they were like, Judy Blume was like my best friend, but those novels that they had back then, those romance novels, oh my God.
And there was no teen section. It was straight, if you were an advanced reader, I was 13 going Clan of the
Yes.
Cave Bear,
Yes.
Patrice Shaw, learning about harem. So I always use myself as an example. Like, you don't want to have necessarily your 13-year-old consuming adult content with no one to talk to. Maybe you do, but also these are like very age appropriate where you have to work hard to get one fulfilling scene.
I agree.
I think there's a reason we see that the Sarah J. Maas books are some of the most banned books in the United States. And I think that that speaks to the shame I was talking about a minute ago that people feel about their own sexuality and the fact that they enjoyed those books because they are also wildly popular. And I think that there's a part of them that is afraid that their teenagers are going to realize that their mom's into finger banging fairy books, and that makes them feel threatened. And so their reaction to that is to make sure that nobody has access to it. And I don't know quite what the best argument is with those people, but I think one of the ways that is easier is to come with the like, hey, I really liked those books too. And to just kind of start it there in a positive place of like, you don't need to feel shame. Those books were really fun and they're really propulsive. And talk about some of the themes that she brings up as well that are interesting and about empowerment, and have other things about the books as well. It's not just those scenes.
Well, I'm so impressed. You guys, I feel like have an answer to everything. So appreciate it. Shannon, do you have something else to add to that one?
I was just gonna say, this is the first panel I've been on in more than a decade of doing panels where we've talked about fairies, so, fun panel.
We got it all. You guys are amazing. You do. You make it seem so simple. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm taking notes over here. So thank you. Okay, we do have just about 8 more minutes. So I want to encourage anyone who is in the audience, if you do have a question, to please get it in there because we just have a few minutes left. And I'm going to put in another one right here into the chat. How do you believe the idea of library neutrality has impacted practices and policies related to equity and justice? What suggestions do you have for moving past what some might call this myth of neutrality? This is for anyone.
This
I
is
can.
Go ahead, Jess. This is a loaded one, a loaded question, because I feel that equity and justice should always have just been a part of what Andrew Carnegie started libraries for. Like, right? It was called the People's University. I don't know if people have studied that history of when, Andrew Carnegie and his individuals that worked with him, but they called the public library the People's University for a reason, and it is the People's University. So when it comes to the practices and the policies, I think we need to go back to those days when he started and what he started them for and why they were started. And equity should always be a part of it, and justice has always been a part of it, but it's individuals and not the institution. So I believe that if those individuals would enlighten themselves on the historical context of things, then they will see things differently, opposed to approaching it from their personal standpoint. Let's approach it from the professional side. That's my thing about that statement.
I was gonna say that I always felt like you can't really call spaces and places neutral when in laws racism has been baked in, right? So you have like the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? And so it told a group of people that they were not allowed to be apart. You have Jim Crow and Reconstruction, where it was told that these spaces and places had to be separate, and yet we know they were not given equal funding, right? So I always feel like that is equally as a myth of a lot of how people build up these like what a great country or pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, like all that stuff, like the invisible hand, right? So how I feel is that in the future, like working with machines, we built they're biased, right? And they're biased because humans are biased. And I feel like if in a world we can't get past that policies impact and affect people, that who can come to this space, who has access to this space, who you allow in this space, is going to impact now and in the future, as stuff starts ramping up within, for me, like the automation space, then it's like who has access to, as you've heard all through, who has economic access to tools that allow their communities to grow food or to have access when climate takes this, huge toll. So I always feel like, to me, there is no myth of neutrality. How that's presented to people in spaces and places can be different, again, but I feel like moving past it should happen, whether it's within your own librarian. It might not be where your institution is, but I personally feel like that should be something that you work through, because from here on out, I feel like it's going to be very hard not to have someone point a finger and say that you're doing some type of political maneuver, whether you're for fascism, against fascism. I feel like people are going to truly start being like, you are a part of something, whether you want that label or not. So figuring that out, I feel like that self-work has to be done personally. That's my piece.
I'm going to take kind of a different tack because I'm a huge proponent of intellectual freedom. I'm a free speech maximalist. I think the more speech, the better. But I also believe that promotes equity and social justice. I think when we start trying to limit speech and restrict speech, the speech that gets restricted first is speech from marginalized communities. History shows that over and over. And in fact, in Europe, they have much more restrictive laws regarding freedom of speech, and it's often marginalized communities who bear the brunt of that. So from my perspective, I think one way that libraries can promote and enhance equity and social justice is by defending freedom of speech.
I have to agree. And I would say that one of my frustrations of trying to like lead people in this moment to be active within the librarian community that has been frustrating to come up against is this, like, I can't get involved at all, even when it's an existential threat to everything that I do. And I think that there's a really big difference between being neutral in terms of what is available in the library. You get San Francisco and Ann Coulter books, and you bring in All Boys Aren't Blue, and those all belong on the shelf. And I agree with Shannon. In that way, I'm absolutely a free speech maximalist. I think that there should be books that I find deeply offensive on every library's shelves because I want everybody to be able to go into the library and confirm their own ideas. Because let's be honest, a lot of the times when we look for books, that's what we're looking for. We are looking to confirm our own ideas, and the library gets to confirm that for everybody, right? Like, that's fine. I disagree with a lot of those books, but I'm going to do what I wish more book banners did and just not read them. They're not for me. But neutrality as it extends into action is where I think we hit a real problem, where people are like, well, because I'm a librarian, I have to stay neutral about everything. And I think that that is what will pave the road to ruin for all of us. I think we have to let go of that idea because it's just not true anymore. Librarians don't get to be outside of this fight that is happening about them. In an ideal world, educators would never have to participate in the political space. That shouldn't be their calling. They got into it because they want to help kids become the best, biggest versions of themselves and have all the best tools at their disposal, etc. We don't live in that world right now. We don't live in that country. And so this is kind of an all hands on deck situation that we're coming up against with the IMLS funding cuts, just as one example, the dissolution of the Department of Education, not to mention all of the district level book bans that are happening, not even mentioning the state level ones that are happening. And so there are different kinds of neutrality. Providing everybody a place where they can receive the sort of information that they are looking for, that is one thing. Saying I am neutral about all things, even things that contribute directly to my own professional demise, is a completely other thing. And I would love to urge people to abandon that way of thinking about neutrality, because that is an argument that has been poised to you as a way to silence you in the face of your own destruction. Nobody who has your best interest in mind is making that argument about you right now. The only people who want you to take that tack are people who want you to be silent, because the vast majority of Americans disagree with what is happening with the complete dissolution of all of our government amenities. And most people like librarians. Most people trust you. And the one way that they can make sure that that trust isn't leveraged for any kind of benefit is to make you afraid to speak at all.
Thank y'all so much. And I can't believe I have to say this. It is time for our closing, my closing, because I can sit here and talk with y'all all day. You have been sensational. I knew you would be, but thank you so much. Thank you to all of our presenters for engaging with us in this space. And this was our last session of the day. So as an audience member, if it was your only session or your fifth, we are thankful that you came. Thanks also to the CERT team for handling tech and the chat. CERT is committed to ensuring that all of our programs are diverse, inclusive, and free for attendees. To do so, we rely on support from ALA membership and direct donations. You can help champion our Roundtable's mission by donating at the link provided in the chat and or joining CERT as a member. You can make a general gift or select the CERT task force or award you wish to support. Please help us maintain our high quality programming like these people here today, the core values that sustain it, and our commitment to accessibility by making a donation, becoming a CERT member, or helping to spread word about our roundtable and events. I cannot say it anymore, emphasize anymore. Thank you so much for being here. And I hope to chat libraries with you all soon. Thank you.
Good finger banging. Have a great day.
Thank
Yeah, thank you. Have a great day,
Oh,
everyone. This was,
you.
to my fellow panelists, this was great. I enjoyed being here with you guys.
Yes,
Yes,
thank you all.
nice to meet you, Maggie. I've only seen you on book covers.
Yes,
You
We'll
too,
get you
Shannon.
all together again.
yes.
Thank you all so
Thank
much.
you.